Hello and welcome to another episode of When Life Hands You Lemons, the podcast where Lennon hands you music industry advice and you apply it to your professional career. In this episode, I sit down with Tammy Austin, who is a licensed mental health counselor here in Orlando, Florida. The music industry has seen a lot of unfortunate events due to depression, anxiety, and overall mental health. Tammy sits down and we discuss a lot of the unfortunate events that kind of come through with mental health, how and when to recognize that someone needs help with their mental health, and resources that one can utilize to assist them in their healing process. So, without further ado, here's my discussion with Tammy Austin. First of all, I want to say thank you for taking the time to sit down with me and answer a few questions about such an important topic in today's society. We have Tammy with us. She's a mental health counselor here in Orlando, Florida. And we're going to sit down and have a few questions for her and discuss kind of the shady areas of mental health. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, would you mind kind of telling us a little bit who you are, where you went to school, what got you into counseling, all that kind of stuff?
Okay. Well, actually, I went to school locally here in Orlando, attended the University of Central Florida. I actually had an interest in counseling since the age of 12. And what got me, really going, I was that kid at school back in the day where people would come and share their problems or seek me out to share their problems. And I found that I really liked helping people. So just kind of followed that passion over the years.
To kind of get going, can you kind of break down what is mental health? It's such a broad term, and I think it's such an umbrella term, and it covers so many different issues. What kind of issues does it cover, and what to you is mental health?
Okay, well, mental health is your emotional well-being, your ability to handle the ups and downs of life, your ability to be able to maintain, or one's ability, I should say, to be able to maintain healthy relationships, healthy boundaries, just to be able to function on a day-to-day basis.
Why in today's society is it so important? Because recently in the music industry, we've lost quite a few people to mental health, Avicii recently. So why is it so important today?
Well, I think just, along with the music industry, as we just look in terms of our society in general, there was another school shooting this past week. Mental health is extremely important. And I think, unfortunately, there are so many people walking amongst us that varying degrees of mental well-being, and that may be just one stressor away from an incident of either harming themselves or harming someone else.
And it's unfortunate that we've had so many that it has to come to a school shooting to kind of really raise the awareness of the issue, and that kids are suffering so much. Who's affected the most? Do you see it more so in kids, or do you see it more so in adults? Is it kind of, in your professional opinion, does the age play a role?
I think it starts in childhood. And actually, that brings me to one of the pieces of information that I wanted to discuss today. And it's actually just a little questionnaire, but it's called the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire. And as I've gotten into doing more trauma work myself as a therapist, I include this form in my intakes with my clients. There's also one that we use specifically for children. But, the research is staggering when you look at how such a simple little questionnaire and how a person responds to that can dictate so many important aspects of their lives as they grow older. And again, it looks at what types of adverse experiences an individual has had before the age of 18.
So what about how does that kind of carry off? How do issues in childhood kind of carry into adulthood? Do you kind of see them evolve as they grow older? Do you see it kind of staying the same, just deviating just a little bit? Or how does that kind of work as they're going through their teen years into their adult years?
Well, I think things can actually become exacerbated throughout their adult years if they don't get the appropriate resources or help as a younger child or even as an adolescent. And as I was just kind of preparing for today and just looking over, some of the information in terms of the music industry, I think the first thing that struck me was so many musicians have, or artists have, a significant number of adverse childhood experiences growing up, which is probably lends itself to their creativity, but at the same time also lends itself for other kinds of, I'm going to say kind of pre-morbid or other kinds of, issues that come up.
With a lot of people these days, like the music industry is very grueling, and it's a very, very stressful industry. It's all in who you know, and I've personally experienced it with, I feel like sometimes I'm not going to be successful, and I can imagine what that stress would be like when you're in the spotlight. Like with Avicii's recent passing, his family said that he was a very fragile person, and he just got kind of caught up, and it just got to be too much for him, and it was just unfortunate that it kind of had to be like that. But there are a lot of resources, especially in the UK now, that are starting to open up that are specific to musicians. So that's definitely an interesting thing to see. So how can you think we can prevent these kind of issues before they cause major issues? What about like the school shootings? How do we prevent those? Do you think it's a mental health issue? Is it gun control? What do you think? Is it a mixture of both?
I think it's a mixture of both. But I think, just to kind of bring it back to our topic for today, I do think when it comes to even the music industry, more mental health resources, that are not tied to, and this is not an area that I'm well versed on, but I know that, and just from things that I've read over the years, that industry can be very predatory, and so I think resources that are not tied to, that are more objective, that people can or musicians can take advantage of, because I think. You made a good point. People are fragile going in, and success, money, unlimited, or what feels like unlimited resources can take a person who perhaps is fragile and, really put them in a vulnerable place.
That kind of does like my first question. Is there anything that you have that you wanted to kind of interject, and any information you want to add?
Well, again, I'm going to go back just to the ACE study, and again, as I was preparing for today, I came across the Bellis study, and the Bellis study. In fact, someone actually did the work to look at. In fact, it's called "Dying to Be Famous," but it looks at musicians specifically and their ACE scores, and the term that they use, which I totally agree with. The term that they used is called pre-fame adverse childhood experiences. And it talked about just the impact of a person's trauma history. And again, having access to what could seem like unlimited resources, having access to people who basically, no filters, no one to say, no, and, no one to help one with balance, with lifestyle choices, all of those things, that we need. And, the other interesting aspect, when it comes to just, again, mental health, and specifically mental health and depression, usually there's another term that's called, co-occurring disorders. And what that looks at is that typically when someone has a substance use or substance misuse problem, that is usually not the primary. The primary is typically a mental health issue, be it depression, be it bipolar disorder. And so what people tend to see might be the substance use or misuse and totally miss the depression or, again, the bipolar disorder. And so, basically the importance of looking at both sides of that so that people can get the appropriate help that they need.
One of my favorite shows is it's on A&E called Intervention, with the various drug uses and heroin, and every episode seems to come down to either childhood trauma or they were abused as a child, and a lot of that stems from mental health. It kind of goes up into mental health, and it's really sad to see that it happens more often than not. And I can't imagine what happens behind closed doors. A lot of people, including myself, suffer from anxiety, and some people also suffer from depression. Do these two kind of go hand in hand, or what are the symptoms and that friends, families, and colleagues can watch out for?
They actually can go hand in hand, and there is a diagnosis for anxiety and depression. So yes, they can go hand in hand. And what friends and family need to look for, again, I'm going to go back to coping for a moment, and the person's ability to be resilient, to be flexible, to be kind to themselves, because sometimes, when people are dealing with especially high levels of anxiety and everything, has to be perfect and has to be, that's a lot of pressure to put on oneself. But at the same time, that makes it difficult to kind of bounce back when things don't go the way, you hoped. And so that's where the depression may come in. And even just, to look at what someone may need to do to prepare because of the anxiety, what they may need to do, or the level of, let's say, intoxication, or the level of a high that they may need to be at to be able to perform, those kinds of things. What people need to look for are the kind of the behind the scenes. What's that person like after, the lights are off? They need to look at, again, lifestyle. How are they sleeping? Are they eating? Are they getting some exercise? What kinds of relationships do they have? One of the things sometimes we see, or we don't know about, but people may see, where that person just can't get out of bed, particularly for people dealing with anxiety. Anxiety is worst in the morning. So, again, being able to really get that full picture of how that person is functioning, and then added to that, the level of substance use or misuse that may be going on as well.
Well, you discussed about monitoring them behind the scenes. Well, how would you get about kind of getting into their behind the scenes, just becoming closer friends with them? Or, because some people are really, really very, very private people, like they come out, they talk, and you think that they're very sociable, but how would you kind of get behind the scenes to kind of investigate and really learn and decide for yourself if they do need help?
Well, and that's the thing. That may not be something that everyone per se has access to. And so I think it's important. Actually, as we're talking, and again, as I was just reading over some of the information, to prepare for our discussion today, I wonder if better information needs to be made available to family and friends of even budding musicians, because I think that may be where the help may come in. Those people that will hopefully remain in the inner circle as their fame increases, but those people that they trust, getting the information to those people who know them best, because they may be the ones that can make the difference, I think.
And is it better to have somebody that the person is maybe close to or comfortable around than somebody that maybe they know, but they're not as close to? Are people more open to discussing that with people who are they're closer to? Or
in my experience, when we're doing, I'm going to call it an intervention, or where a family member or a friend is bringing someone in, we're usually more successful. They don't know me, but because they trust the person that's bringing them in. And then the person that's bringing them in has a degree of confidence that I may be able to help. We're able to make some things happen.
If somebody goes in and they get into their private life and they deem that they do need some type of help, whether they're just not getting out of bed or they just have no motivation, what should that person do to kind of bring it to their attention or bring it to somebody else's attention to start seeking help?
Well, I think for starters, having an open and honest conversation with the individual. I mean, again, they are an adult. They are of legal age. They're, consenting age. So they do have to agree. And so having an honest and open dialogue with them is a place to start.
Once you get that information, do you go to somebody like you, or who else could you go to?
Yes, you definitely could seek out a mental health professional. and start there, or depending, sometimes people go right to a psychiatrist. But, it's really a combination. It's not, necessarily go right to the medication, but it may be a combination of medication and talk therapy. So really trying to put together a team that can help that individual.
And then you mentioned psychiatrists. So some people like to kind of keep things more natural, and they like to steer away of the medication, and I completely understand that. So what's the difference between somebody like you and somebody that is a psychiatrist?
Well, I'm a therapist, so I don't prescribe any medication. What therapists do is we teach skills. We help individuals with increasing their self-awareness so that they can, basically, they're monitoring themselves. We're also talking in terms of putting together your accountability team, so to speak, and those people that can come to you and say, hey, I notice you're not sleeping, or I notice, you're not eating, and people that you'll listen to. But basically, it's about empowering people with knowledge about themselves, about maybe the condition that they may be dealing with, so that they can be in a position to manage themselves.
So it's basically just bringing to attention the issues that they do have and why people are concerned, and then how to address them in an effective manner.
Yeah. Yes.
In your professional experience, what are the causes? I know we touched on this earlier. What are some of the causes of these issues? If they're not treated, what are some of the repercussions? And can they lead to other mental health issues? So, for example, if somebody starts out with anxiety, can it lead to massive, like bad OCD, or like bulimia, anorexia, things like that?
It could, yes. Again, those are things that are kind of, if you think about most mental health issues are really on a spectrum. So you can see someone with very mild depression, just like you could see a person with severe depression. So it's depression, but again, it's on a spectrum. And so, yes, they could.
Yeah, we kind of discussed that, when and how someone should reach out for help. And do those people usually reach out for themselves, or do you usually see people reaching out on behalf of them?
It's both. It's both. I especially personally, and I think, most mental health professionals would agree, we like to see when the person is reaching out, because they're usually pretty highly motivated. But at the same time, sometimes they're reaching out because family members or friends have spoken to them.
Are there any resources available?
There's tons of resources online. Yes. And there are actually several federally sponsored websites that have a great deal of information, and I can get you that so you can, share that information. But there are tons of resources online for people. Lastly, I was looking at some information that had to deal with the causes of death for musicians from different genres. And it's interesting when you look at the statistics, because overall, what they looked at was accidental, suicidal, homicide, heart-related, and cancer deaths. And the number for suicide is overall 6.8%. But then when you look at certain genres, metal has almost 20% suicide. Meanwhile, when you look at hip hop, for example, 51, almost 52% homicide. And then when you look at accidental deaths, which I found interesting, punk is 30%. But interesting, in this study, what they did is they combined accidental and suicide. So accidental could be a drug overdose. So it kind of just makes you wonder. But the other interesting thing that you look at is for younger musicians, that they're saying that that there's a staggering, again, 20% for metal musicians, and but they're saying at the same time, because they haven't lived long enough, you can't look at things like heart-related, or cancer. So I think overall, getting the information to the people that are closest to them, making sure maybe people coming in, I won't even say maybe, but people coming into the industry are fully aware of the need for balance and lifestyle and some level of accountability for themselves may help.
Based on that study, why do you think certain genres are more susceptible to homicide or accidental deaths or suicides versus other genres? Does it have to play into cultures? Does it have to play into different parts of the world? Or even just the genre, the lyrical content of the music?
I think some of the lyrical, but certainly lifestyle. Lifestyle has quite a bit to do with it. Culture has a lot to do with it. In fact, the authors of the study are even saying that they think that certain genres sort of pull people in. It's like, okay, in other words, perhaps if I'm in the punk music industry, then I may have a more high risk type of lifestyle than somebody in the country western, So yeah, it goes along with the overall, I think, the genre and the culture that's associated with.
I know a lot of the electronic music used to be like festivals. Well, they still are to an extent, but it's kind of dying down, is very heavily on drug use. Some people feel like they need to take LSD or they need to do Molly to get the full experience, and that's simply not true. How can that kind of affect, can that start anything? Can taking that one pill kind of ignite a whole fire?
Maybe not taking that one pill, but again, if one subscribes to a certain lifestyle and a certain culture, then yes, it could. And I think, again, the key here is what people bring to the table and what we know, and I'm going to go back to the adverse childhood experiences. People bring lots of brokenness into the industry. They bring the brokenness into their creativity. And then when you put all of these other factors into it, that brokenness can be exploited. And the person doesn't have the coping skills to be able to manage all of that. And so it puts certain musicians more at risk than others for suicide or for accidental death.
Yeah, and that makes sense. They're taking their problems and they're taking them to music, to festivals, and thinking that it's going to just solve all their problems. And unfortunately, it's not that easy.
Or again, it's just they've found a way to turn their pain into creativity. And with that being said, there's so many other influences that come along with that. And so, again, how does the industry better prepare their artists to be able to take care of themselves? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones that have to take care of themselves and make those choices that are good for them.
For somebody that is like a musician that is kind of just starting out, and being that we've clearly stated that the industry can be very grueling and it's very stressful and straining on mental health, what are a couple points that you would point out to, like, they should take into account before they get going and before they start getting the attention, before they start getting so busy? What are some of the key points you think that they should be aware of?
Well, again, I think as part of taking care of yourself, having some type of a good and healthy routine and structure to your day, to your life, having good boundaries, having supportive people that know you around you so that you can maintain those little disciplines that help that person to be their best selves. Because I think all of that kind of goes out of the window too at times when fame comes knocking, and so, making sure, you're getting the rest that you need, especially, again, if someone's a little fragile or has had some adverse experiences growing up, that they are taking care of their emotional and mental well-being. They're eating well, that they are, that they recognize when they've been maybe pushed too far. They recognize when they are empty so that they can step back and do what they need to do to kind of, refresh themselves instead of just trying to run on the fumes.
How do you kind of catch yourself before you've run too far? Because it's happened to me many times where I go so hard and I go so fast and I get so excited and into the project that I just forget to eat or I forget to sleep. And sometimes I can't imagine doing that. And I just eventually start getting sick. I notice my body starting to shut down. But sometimes people can go past that and just say, oh, it's just nothing, I'll just drink a bottle of water and it'll be good and keep going. So what are some kind of key things to keep in mind before that happens and before you really put a strain on your body?
I think learning to listen to our bodies and listen to ourselves. I've been there, done that too. And I, kind of like the GPS, we tend to override it. So not doing so much overriding, I think, and just kind of stopping and listening because your body tells you what it needs.
How does ADHD factor into all of this, and how does it affect the memory of materials in adults?
ADHD it's separate from, depression or anxiety that we talked about earlier. And yes, it can affect memory. It can affect, again, the routines that a person has because they tend to be more on the impulsive side. And so, and they also are not so good at, or people that suffer from that are not so good at listening to themselves. And so they will push themselves. Again, routines are not always adhered to. Kind of high energy, going from one subject or one project to another, not really finishing things. So it can definitely, affect. And then ultimately can even lead to depression because they're kind of leaving a trail of unfinished things.
Is that something that can be cured, or is it something that you just kind of have to learn to cope with?
Both. There's medication for it, and not everybody wants medication. And there is something that we use called mindfulness, which is a strategy of where people are taught to be able to be present and aware moment to moment and managing those moments. Again, a lot of these things, most mental health professionals, where we want to empower and educate our clients and consumers so that we basically are working ourselves out of a job, which is okay because the purpose is that we fully educate and teach our clients to be able to make good and healthy choices for themselves and ultimately live their best lives.
Thank you for being on the show, and I appreciate your advice, and I'm sure that the listeners will as well.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the third episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. All the names, companies, and products mentioned in this episode will be in the show notes below. Be sure to subscribe to my email list to receive updates when a new episode is live, as well as music industry tips and tricks. Also, please leave me a 5-star review on Apple, as it greatly helps this podcast be discovered. You can also support me on Patreon, which will be in the show notes below. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. Hands you lemons. Hands you lemons. Hands you